The Cold War was one of the most defining periods of the 20th century. Spanning over 4 decades, it shaped global politics, economics, and ideologies. But unlike conventional wars, this conflict wasn't fought on traditional battlefields. It was a war of espionage, propaganda, proxy wars, and nuclear brinkmanship between two superpowers, the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. In this episode, we'll dive deep into the origins, key events, and the eventual end of the Cold War. From the tense arms race and space race to proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam, this story is a chilling reminder of a world divided. Welcome to the Cold War. Part 1, Origins of the Cold War. To understand the Cold War, we must go back to the end of World War II. The Allied powers, led by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, had defeated Nazi Germany. But as the dust settled, ideological differences between the capitalist West and the communist East began to surface. At the Yalta and Potsdam conferences in 1945, leaders like Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin discussed the post-war order. Yet, mistrust was evident. The Soviets sought a buffer zone of friendly states in Eastern Europe, while the West championed free elections and self-determination. The division of Germany into occupation zones symbolized the growing rift. In 1946, Winston Churchill famously declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe. On one side were countries under Soviet influence, such as Poland, Hungary, and East Germany. On the other side were Western democracies supported by the United States. Part 2, The Cold War begins. In 1947, the United States launched the Truman Doctrine, pledging to contain the spread of communism. Shortly after, the Marshall Plan provided billions of dollars to rebuild war-torn Europe, strengthening Western economies and countering Soviet influence. Berlin Blockade and Airlift, 1948-49. The first major confrontation came with the Berlin Blockade in 1948. In an attempt to force the Allies out of West Berlin, Stalin cut off all road and rail access. The United States and its allies responded with the Berlin Airlift, delivering food and supplies to the city for over a year. This marked the beginning of open hostility between the two blocs. Part 3, The Arms Race and Space Race. The nuclear arms race. As tensions escalated, both superpowers raced to build their nuclear arsenals. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb, ending the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. By the 1950s, both sides had hydrogen bombs, capable of devastating entire cities. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, meant that any conflict between the superpowers could lead to global annihilation. The space race. The Cold War extended into space with the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, by the Soviet Union in 1957. The U.S. responded with its own space program, culminating in the Apollo moon landing in 1969. The space race symbolized technological and ideological superiority, with each side vying to prove its system was the future of humanity. Part 4, Proxy Wars and Global Impact. Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The Cold War wasn't just fought in Europe. In Korea, the US and its allies supported the South, while the Soviet Union and China backed the Communist North. The war ended in a stalemate, but it solidified the divide between North and South Korea that persists today. Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. Vietnam became another Cold War battleground. The US intervened to stop communist forces led by Ho Chi Minh, but the war became a costly quagmire. By 1975, the Communist North had unified Vietnam, dealing a blow to American influence in Southeast Asia. Part 5, Crisis Points. Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The world came closest to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When the U.S. discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, President Kennedy imposed a naval blockade. After tense negotiations, the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for U.S. concessions. The crisis highlighted the dangers of the arms race and the need for diplomacy. The Berlin Wall, 1961 to 1989. The Berlin Wall became the ultimate symbol of the Cold War. Built in 1961, it physically divided East and West Berlin, separating families and communities. Its fall in 1989 marked the beginning of the end for the Cold War. Part 6, The Cold War Ends. By the 1970s, both sides sought détente, a relaxation of tensions. However, the Soviet Union struggled with economic stagnation and political unrest. Reforms by Mikhail Gorbachev, such as Glasnost and Perestroika, inadvertently weakened the communist regime. In 1989, Eastern Bloc countries overthrew their governments, and in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, marking the official end of the Cold War. The Cold War reshaped the modern world, leaving a legacy of alliances, conflicts, and technological advancements. Though the superpower rivalry has ended, its echoes continue to influence global politics today. Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical deep dives with Historian AI.